In this tutorial, I will show you how to make this bunny face applique. This applique, I did also turn this into a granny square, but for today's tutorial, it is how to make the applique. In a future tutorial, I will show you how to make it into a granny square as well. All right, so let's go ahead and get started, and I will show you how to make the bunny face applique. To make the bunny face, I'm going to use this 4-ply worsted weight acrylic yarn, and this is Red Heart Super Saver yarn, and the color of this yarn is called Cafe Latte. And I'm going to use a size I 9 5.5 millimeter crochet hook. I am going to start with a magic ring. So to make the magic ring, you just want to go ahead and wrap the yarn over your 2 fingers, and then over again and make a little X mark on the top of your 2 fingers, and then you just take the crochet hook, insert it underneath this strand, and then I'm just going to rotate it down so that the hook will grab that strand in front of it, and just pull it underneath like that, and then twist your crochet hook up so that that loop is now in the center of the X mark. And then here under this strand, I'm going to insert the hook underneath that strand and pull it through this loop to create my magic ring. When you work the first round of stitches, you do want to take this tail and wrap it along the magic ring, and you want to work your stitches through the magic ring and over the tail as well to encase the stitches over that strand. That way when you're done, when you pull the tail to close up the magic ring, it will close correctly. If you leave it off to the side and you only work through the magic ring without wrapping that around to work your stitches over that as well, your magic ring will not close up correctly when you're done. For round 1, I am going to work 6 single crochets into the center of the magic ring. Okay, now I have 6 single crochets. I'm going to pull the tail of the magic ring, so that way I can join with a slip stitch to the first single crochet I did when I began round 1. So I'll insert my hook into that first stitch and join with a slip stitch. And that completes round 1. When you're done with round 1, you should have 6 single crochets. For round 2, I am going to do 2 single crochets in every single stitch. So in every single stitch for round 2, I will be increasing by doing 2 single crochets into every single stitch. So to begin round 2, I am going to chain 1 and do 2 single crochets into that first stitch. Before I continue, I am going to put a stitch marker into the first stitch to mark the beginning of round 2. And then I'm going to continue doing 2 single crochets into every single stitch. Okay, so I just did 2 single crochets into every single stitch, so I should have 12 stitches when I finish round 2. So I just did 2 single crochets into every single stitch, and now I'm going to join with the slip stitch to the first single crochet that I did when I began this round. So I'll go ahead and insert my hook and join with a slip stitch. And that completes round 2. When you finish round 2, you should have 12 stitches. For round 3, I am going to start by doing 1 single crochet into the first stitch. Then the next stitch will be an increase. and then the next stitch after that, 1 single crochet, then increase. So I'm going to start by doing 1 single crochet into the first stitch. The next stitch will have 2 single crochets into a stitch for the increase, and I'll do that all the way around. So I'll go ahead and start round 3. I will chain 1 and then do a single crochet into that first stitch. That was the stitch where I just joined with the slip stitch. Okay, so that's the first stitch of the round, 1 single crochet into the stitch. I will then place my stitch marker into that stitch to mark the beginning of round 3. And then the next stitch will have 2 single crochets. Since I want to do an increase, I will work 2 single crochets into the stitch. The next stitch will just have 1 single crochet. The next stitch, increase by doing 2 single crochets. Okay, that stitch had 2 single crochets. The next stitch, just 1 single crochet. The next one, 2 single crochets. And then 1, and then 2 into the next. So I'm just alternating by doing 1, then increase, then 1 single crochet, then increase, and I'm doing that all the way around. Okay, so that one had 2. This is going to be 1. The next stitch, increase. The next stitch will have just the 1 single crochet. And then the last stitch of the round, you will end up with having an increase. So 2 single crochets into this last stitch for the increase. And then I will join with a slip stitch to the very first stitch that I did when I began round 3. I'm going to insert my hook into the stitch and join with a slip stitch. And that completes round 3. When you finish round 3, you should have 18 stitches. And then for round 4, I am going to start by doing 1 single crochet into the first 2 stitches of the round, and then the next stitch I will do an increase by working 2 single crochets into a stitch to do an increase. And then I'll work 1 single crochet into 2 stitches, then increase, and I'll do that all the way around. So to begin round 4, I will start by chaining 1, and into the first stitch where I just joined, I will do 1 single crochet into that stitch. And then I'm going to place my stitch marker into that stitch to mark the beginning of round 4. And then the very next stitch will also have just 1 single crochet. So the first 2 stitches of round 4, 1 single crochet each. The next stitch is an increase, so I'm going to do 2 single crochets into the stitch. And then 1 single crochet into the next 2 stitches. The next stitch is an increase, so 2 single crochets into this stitch. Then the next 2 stitches, 1 single crochet. The very next stitch is an increase, 2 single crochets, and then 1 single crochet into the next 2 stitches. The next stitch is an increase, 2 single crochets, 1 single crochet into the next 2 stitches, the next stitch will have 2 single crochets, the next 2 stitches, 1 single crochet each, and then the next stitch, the last stitch of the round, will be an increase, so 2 single crochets into that last stitch. And then I am going to join with a slip stitch to that first stitch where the stitch marker is. And that completes round 4. When you finish round 4, you should have 24 stitches. Okay, now I'm going to create the first ear for the bunny. So rather than having to fasten off to make the ears, I am going to show you how I'm going to make the ears. Even when I add the pink yarn, I'm not going to fasten off with the brown yarn, and I'll show you what I mean in just a moment. Now I'm going to create the ears for the bunny. I'm going to need some pink yarn for the inner part of the ear for the bunny. Instead of having to make the ear and then having to sew it on, I am going to keep this yarn attached, and I'll show you what I mean. So I need pink yarn right now, but I don't want to cut the yarn and fasten off and then have to reattach it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the loop up so that way it won't unravel. And you can place a stitch marker into the loop, and that will keep it from unraveling in case that loop was to shrink down. It would keep it from closing on you. So I'm going to add a stitch marker as well. So then I need some pink yarn for the inner part of the ear. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take my pink yarn. I'm leaving this attached because I just don't want to have to reattach it again. When I crochet, I like to try not to fasten off as much as possible. So I like to not have to cut the yarn and reattach the yarn as much as possible. So that's why I'm going to show you how I'm going to do this. So I'm leaving the loop there, still attached. So into the very next stitch right here, I'm going to insert my hook underneath the front and back loop of the stitch. And then I'll yarn over with the pink yarn and pull up a loop. And then with the pink yarn, I will chain 5 chains. Now I have 5 chains with the pink yarn, and I am going to skip the chain that is closest to the hook. Into the second chain from the hook, I will do a single crochet. And when you do this single crochet here, you want to make sure that you work the single crochet not too tightly. You do want to have a looser tension when you work this stitch, because we will need to place more than one stitch into this stitch when we work with this first color again to go around the ear. So into this second chain, I will do a single crochet, and I'm not going to work the stitch very tightly because I want to make sure I can get several stitches into this stitch, because I want to make sure I can get more than one stitch into this stitch. Okay, so that's the first single crochet, and then I have 3 chains left. I will do 1 single crochet into each of these 3 chains. So each chain, 1 single crochet each, and I'm working back towards the face of the bunny. Okay, so I just did 4 single crochets with the pink yarn. I started with 5 chains. I skipped the chain closest to the hook, and into the second chain I did a single crochet and then a single crochet into the next 3 chains, so a total of 4 single crochets with the pink yarn. And then I am going to do a slip stitch back into that same stitch where I attached the pink yarn. So back into that same stitch right here where I attached the pink yarn, I will insert my hook and I will do a slip stitch. Okay, so there is the pink inner part of the ear. So then I am going to fasten off with the pink yarn. So I'm going to go ahead and just cut the yarn here, and then I will yarn over with that tail of yarn with the pink yarn and just pull that through the loop to give it a tug to fasten off. And then I will go ahead and take the 2 strands of pink yarn and tie them into a couple of knots. Okay, and then I'll weave those tails in after I'm done. Okay, so there is the pink portion for the first ear. So now what I need to do is here where I have the stitch marker into the loop for the first color yarn that I started with, I still have that working yarn attached. I will place my hook back into that loop where the stitch marker is. Now that I have the hook back into the loop, I am going to take this stitch marker out. And then what I'm going to do here, I still have this working yarn attached, so that way I could just continue working around the ear without having to fasten off. And this was my way of not having to make the ears separate and then having to sew them on. I just think this is going to look a lot nicer. Now if you look at the stitches here, this is the top of the stitches. You can see the V stitches at the top, and then here, this is the bottom edge of the single crochets. There are 4 stitches. So what I'm going to do is I am going to do a single crochet into the first 3 stitches, working in the bottom edge of the single crochets. So there's 1, 2, 3. This 4th one, I'm going to do something different. So into the first 3 stitches, 1 single crochet each with this first color yarn that I left attached. So I'm going to insert my hook into the first stitch along the bottom edge and do a single crochet. And then the second stitch and a single crochet again. And then here's the next 3rd stitch. I will do a single crochet. So I just did 1 single crochet into 3 stitches. Now here is the 4th stitch here. So here's the bottom edge of the single crochet, and then here is the top of the stitch. You can see the front and back loop. I am going to work 2 stitches into the bottom edge of this 4th stitch. So I will insert my hook into the bottom of the stitch and do 2 single crochets. Okay, so I just did 2 single crochets into that same 4th stitch, and then you can see by doing that you start to turn the corner here, and then I'm going to turn. Now you can see the top edge of the single crochet. So here's the first one, there's a front and back loop, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th stitch. So now into the same stitch where I just worked 2 single crochets into the bottom edge of the stitch, now I'm going to insert my hook into the stitch at the top here underneath the front and back loop, and I will do 2 single crochets into the stitch. So this stitch ended up having 4 stitches in total worked into it. 2 of the stitches in the bottom edge of the stitch and 2 more stitches into the top part of the stitch, where you would work normally into the stitch by working underneath the front and back loop. So 4 single crochets altogether, 2 at the bottom edge and 2 more into the top of the stitch. Okay, so now I am going to work 1 single crochet into the next 3 stitches, working my way back towards the bunny's face. So now the next 3 stitches will just have 1 single crochet each. I will insert my hook underneath both the front and back loop of the stitch when I insert my hook. So there's the front loop and the back loop. I'm going to do 1 single crochet into that stitch. Find my next stitch, insert it underneath the front and back loop, do a single crochet, and then there's 1 more stitch with the pink yarn, and I will do a single crochet into that one. And then what I'm going to do is, here is the very next stitch. This is the stitch where I attached the pink yarn and then did a slip stitch again. The very next stitch along the face of the bunny, I am going to do a slip stitch into that stitch. And then I'm going to chain 1, then I'll skip 1 stitch along the face of the bunny, and then into the very next stitch. After I skip 1, I will do a slip stitch, and then I am going to skip the very next stitch along the face of the bunny, and then to the next stitch I will do a slip stitch. And then what I'm going to do is pull up this loop and place the stitch marker into the loop, so that way the loop will not unravel on me while I leave the working yarn attached, just like I did over here before I started this ear. So now I need to do the same thing here, work the pink portion for the second ear. So now I am going to skip this very next stitch here, and I will do a slip stitch into the next one. So I did a slip stitch here. I'm going to skip one, insert my hook into the next stitch, and I will pull up a loop with the pink yarn, just like I did over here. I am going to yarn over with the pink yarn and pull up a loop, and now I'm going to begin my second ear the same way. I will chain 5 chains with the pink yarn. Okay, so I have my 5 chains with the pink yarn. Then I will skip the chain closest to the hook. Into the second chain from the hook, I will do a single crochet, and then 1 single crochet into the next 3 chains. Okay, so now I have my 4 single crochets, and then I will do a slip stitch into this same chain where I just attached and pulled up a loop with the pink yarn. I will insert my hook and do a slip stitch with the pink yarn. Now I'm ready to fasten off with the pink yarn since I have finished the second ear. And then I will yarn over with that tail of yarn that I just cut, pull that through the loop, give it a tug to fasten off. So here is the second pink part of the ear. So now I need to go back to the working yarn with the original color for the bunny face and continue to work around the ear to finish it off just like I did here. So I'm going to find that loop that the stitch marker is in. I am going to insert my hook into that loop, and then I will take my stitch marker out. I no longer need the stitch marker for this. So then I will adjust the loop back down so I'm ready to begin again. Before I continue, I am going to turn this over to the back of the work and take the 2 strands of pink yarn and just tie them into a couple of knots, just like I did with the first one. Okay, so now I just inserted my hook into the loop that had the stitch marker, so now I'm ready to continue. So I have a stitch right here that's just before the stitch where I attached the pink yarn. That's the one that I skipped, and then I attached the pink yarn and pulled up a loop. So into this very next stitch along the face, just before where I attached the pink yarn, there is this stitch. I am going to do a slip stitch with this working yarn, the original color. And then what I'm going to do is the same thing I did over here. I am going to work along the bottom edge of the single crochets first. So the first 3 stitches, working in the bottom edge of the stitch, I will do 1 single crochet each. So I will find the first stitch, insert my hook into the bottom edge of the stitch and do a single crochet, and then find the next stitch, insert my hook and do a single crochet, and then this next 3rd stitch here along the bottom edge, I will do a single crochet. So the first 3 stitches, 1 single crochet each, just like I did over here. Now this 4th single crochet, you can see this is the top of the stitch. It has a front and back loop, and then this is the bottom edge of the stitch. Into the bottom edge of the stitch, I am going to work 2 single crochets into the bottom edge of the stitch. So I'm going to work 2 single crochets here. So not just one single crochet like I did the first 3 stitches. This one has 2 single crochets. And then you can see it kind of turns the corner. So now if you look at the top of the stitches, you can see the V stitches. Here's the front and back loop of the stitch. There's a front loop and there's a back loop. I'm going to insert my hook underneath both the front and back loop of the stitch. So I will insert my hook underneath the front and back loop of the stitch and work 2 single crochets into this stitch. So this stitch had 4 stitches total. 2 single crochets at the bottom edge of the stitch and 2 single crochets into the top of the stitch as well. And then I have 3 more stitches with the pink yarn. I will insert my hook underneath the front and back loop of each of these stitches and just work 1 single crochet each. So each of these 3 stitches, 1 single crochet each, working my way back towards the face of the bunny. Okay, that's the second one and the third one. And then I will find the next stitch along the face of the bunny here and insert my hook into that stitch and do a slip stitch. And that completes the second ear. So now I am done with this yarn, so I can go ahead and cut the yarn now to fasten off. And then I will yarn over with that tail of yarn where I just trimmed the yarn, yarn over, pull it all the way through the loop to fasten off. And there are the 2 ears for the bunny. So it might have looked a little tricky by leaving the working yarn attached, but that's why I kind of went step by step, showing you how to put the stitch marker in so it wouldn't unravel. I just think it looks a lot nicer than having to make the 2 ears separate and then having to sew them on. I just think it looks a lot nicer that way, and it really isn't that hard. I think it was easy enough to follow. I hope so. So now I'm ready to make the details for the face of the bunny. To make the bottom part of the face where the mouth and nose will be, I need to use some white yarn. So for the bottom part of the face, I am also going to use 4-ply worsted weight acrylic yarn, and I'm going to use the color white. For the bottom part of the face, where the mouth will be and the nose, I am going to start with a magic ring. Okay, so into the magic ring, I will do a single crochet, and then a double crochet, and then I will do a treble crochet. So to do a treble crochet, you want to wrap the yarn 2 times and then insert the hook into the magic ring, pull up a loop. I now have 4 loops on my hook, so I will yarn over, pull through 2 loops, leaving these 3 loops on the hook, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. Now I have 2 loops on the hook, yarn over, pull through 2. So that's how you do your treble crochet, or sometimes you'll hear it called a triple crochet. And then I will do a double crochet into the magic ring, and then chain 2, and then I will do a slip stitch into the magic ring. Okay, so that's how it looks so far. So just to recap, into the magic ring I did a single crochet, then a double crochet, then a treble crochet, and then a double crochet, chain 2, and then slip stitch into the magic ring. So then I'm going to chain 2, and then into the magic ring I will do a double crochet, and then I will do a treble crochet, so I will yarn over 2 times, insert my hook into the magic ring, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, and that's the treble crochet. And then I will work a double crochet into the magic ring, and then a single crochet, and then I will pull the tail of the magic ring to close up the magic ring here, and then I will join with the slip stitch to that first single crochet I did when I began this round. Okay, so that is the bottom part of the bunny's face. So now I can go ahead and cut this yarn. Then yarn over with that, pull that through, give it a tug to fasten off, and then I'm going to pull the magic ring here. Okay, and that completes the bottom part of the bunny's face. So now I need to make a little nose. I am going to use the same pink yarn that I used for the ears. So I used a 5.5 millimeter crochet hook to make the bunny's face, and I also used the 5.50 millimeter crochet hook to make the bottom part of the face of the bunny, where the mouth and nose will be. So now I need to make the nose, and I need to switch to a smaller crochet hook. I will use a 3 millimeter crochet hook to make the nose. For the nose, I will use the same pink yarn that I used for the ears, and I will start with a slip knot. I'm going to leave a little bit of a tail so I can sew it on, and then I will chain 3 chains. Okay, so I have 3 chains. I will skip the chain closest to the hook. Into the second chain from the hook, I will do a slip stitch, and then into the next chain, the last chain, I will do a single crochet. And then I am ready to fasten off, so I am going to trim the yarn here, yarn over, pull that through the loop, give it a tug to fasten off. And that's how you make the little nose. You just turn it like that, so the 2 yarn strands are that way and the pointy part is down. That will be the nose for the bunny. So I'll be sewing that on there. And then I need to make some eyes for the bunny. So for the eyes, I need to make 2. I will use a 3 millimeter crochet hook to make the eyes, just like I did for the nose. I used a 3 millimeter crochet hook for the nose, and I will also use a 3 millimeter crochet hook for the eyes. So for the eyes, I will start with a slip knot, and then I will chain 4 chains. And then join with a slip stitch to that first chain to form a circle. And then I will cut the yarn so I can fasten off, and I'm leaving a little bit of yarn so I can sew it on. Okay, so there's the first eye. Then I need to make a second one exactly the same way. I will start with a slip knot, and then chain 4 chains. And join with a slip stitch to the first chain to form a ring or circle. And then I will cut the yarn, but I'll leave a little bit of a tail to sew it on. And then yarn over with that tail of yarn, pull that through to fasten off. So now I have my 2 outer part of the eyes. And then I will sew these on, and then for the pupil of the eye, I'll just sew on some black yarn, and then for the mouth, I'll use some black yarn to sew on a mouth. Okay, so now I have finished all the parts I need for the bunny's face. So I just need to go ahead and sew these on. Okay, so first what I'm going to do is I am going to sew the nose on to the bunny's face here. So you want to have the 2 strands at the top like this, and then that points down like that. So you want the pointed part like this. So you see how this mouth portion kind of curves here? That's the part that's at the bottom. So then the pointed part of the nose points towards that indentation here at the bottom part of the face. So you want to go ahead and have that like that. And then I'm going to sew that on. So you just want to make sure that that point of the nose lines up with the indentation where it curves in at the center. So the top part is more rounded, where I finished and fastened off. That's the top part. And this is the bottom part of the face. So here, line the point up with that indentation. So then I will place the nose where I want it here and sew it on. I'll bring the tail to the back of the work, to the wrong side. And then I'll do that with the second one. Okay, and then I'm going to sew on the nose. Then I'll just make sure I bring the yarn tail to the back of the work. Okay, so now I have the bunny's nose sewed on, so I'm going to turn it over to the wrong side of the work. And I'll take the 2 strands of pink yarn and just tie it into a couple of knots at the back of the work. Okay, so now I need to sew on a little mouth. So I'm going to use some black yarn to stitch a little mouth on. Okay, so I'm going to use a little bit of black yarn. And I just cut one that's about 2 lengths of the crochet hook. It's probably a little more than I need, but I want to make sure I have enough. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, you see here where if you look at the bottom point of the nose, I am going to use that as my guide, and I'll insert the darning needle right underneath that point of the nose. And then I'm not going to pull it all the way through because I want to make sure I can tie a couple of knots on the back of the face here. That way it won't come unraveled when I'm done stitching on the mouth. And then I'm going to use a straight line here as my guide. And you see how where it indents here? Just before that, I want to insert my needle this way, but I don't want to do it right at the exact bottom edge. I want to make sure that I just go about right there. You can just wherever you think it looks best, but I don't want it to go all the way to the edge. I want to have it like somewhere right around in the center or a little bit more than the center. I'll insert the darning needle from the front to the back. Just like that. So you can see it's not all the way down to the edge. And then I will then come over here just a little bit, like that. It's in line with that. And then I'll go from the back to the front like that. And then I am going to come back over here in line with that and insert the darning needle from the front to the back. And then I'll come over here approximately the same distance as that. And then from the back to the front. And then back over here in line. And then I'll go from the front to the bottom of this line coming from the nose. From the front all the way to the back. And then you can leave your mouth like that if you like to leave it like that, or I'm going to come over here to the corners and just make it look like a little smile. So what I will do is I'm going to start on this side first. I'll come up here a little bit higher than this line because I want to make it curved so it looks like a smile. So when I pull this through, it needs to be higher than that line. And then pull it from the back all the way to the front. And then you can see here, this part of the mouth, I am going to insert my hook at the end of this line here to connect this line. So from the front to the back. And then you can see it curves up like it's starting to have a little smile face. And then I will do the same thing on the other side to match this side. Okay, so then what I'm going to do is I need to come over here to about the same spot as that on this side. And it needs to be higher than that line, just like right there. So not straight across because you want it to have a little curl to like a little smile. And then I'm going to pull that from the back to the front and then connect it to that line here for the mouth. And there is the little smile face for my little bunny. How cute. Okay, so now I'm ready to cut this yarn here since I am done with the mouth. I'm not going to cut it all the way to the edge because I do want to make sure I can tie it into a couple of knots so it doesn't come unraveled. Okay, so then I am going to tie the 2 strands of black yarn into a few knots here, so that way it won't unravel. Maybe even 3. Okay, so now what I'll do is I will trim the 2 strands, but not all the way next to the knot. If you cut it too close, then it might come loose and come undone, and I don't want to do that. Okay, so that finishes the bottom part of the face for the little bunny. I am going to leave this one connected and this one connected because I'm going to use it to sew this on. If your yarn tails aren't long enough, that's fine. You can always cut another piece of white yarn to sew it on. So first I'm going to tie the pink yarn strands again, and I'm going to trim those back just like I did with the tails for the mouth, not all the way next to the knot. Okay, so then I will go ahead and place this where I want it, and then I will use these tails to sew it on. Since this is an applique and I will be sewing it onto something, you can sew it all the way through to the back if you want, since you won't see what's on the back. But if you were going to make this into a granny square, and I did actually do that, I will have a future tutorial where I will show you how to turn this into a granny square. So in the granny square, you do see the back part of the circle. So when I sew it on, I want to make sure that when I sew it on, I only go through the stitches at the top and not all the way through to the back. That way, if you were to have it as a granny square, where you would see the back of the circle here, you wouldn't see all the different color strands to the back. That way it would look nice and neat. But since this is an applique, you wouldn't have to do that. But I will go ahead and sew this on as if I was going to use it for the granny square. When I sew this on, since this will be for an applique, I could just sew it all the way through to the back, since you won't see the back of the work when you sew it onto something. But if you wanted to turn this into a granny square, you would not want the yarn tails to show at the back. You'd want to keep it nice and neat. So what I mean by that is, here is an example of a granny square. I made a cat face. It's similar to the one like this bunny, except for it has, you know, cat ears and little whiskers. Now what I did is, when I sewed this on to the face of the cat, like I'm going to show you how to do on the bunny, I was careful not to have the tails of yarn go through to the back of the cat's face, because I wanted to leave it nice and neat, since this is a granny square. So this is one that I did with the cat ears, and I turned it into a granny square, and I will also be turning this into a granny square. And I'll show you how to do that in a future tutorial. Okay, so I'll go ahead and show you how I will sew this on. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, I'm going to use the yarn tails that are already connected. All right, so I am going to place it on here where I think it looks the best here. So I'll just go like right here near the bottom part of the face and make sure it looks lined up. So you can use that magic ring to kind of center and line up where the nose would be. So you wouldn't want it off to the left or right. So you can use that as your guide to make sure the nose is right in the middle of the face, in other words. So now I'll go ahead and use this to sew it on. So what I'll do is, I will move this over and grab a strand of the yarn or two and just go through the top part of the stitches and not all the way through to the back. And then pull that all the way through. I will then go through the front of the stitches here, and I'll just work all the way around that way. Okay, so then I will sew it through here. Then come back to the bunny's face and find a few strands of yarn and just pick up the stitches at the top of the face, but not all the way through to the back when I sew it on. And then I'll make sure I tuck any pink strands of yarn back there behind it. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and then I will insert my hook through just the white strands of yarn. I want to make sure I don't go through the pink nose with the white yarn, because it definitely would show. And then pull that through to the front. And then I will insert my darning needle through just the white part of the yarn. And then not through the face of the bunny yet, just pull it all the way through first. And then come over here and make sure, I'll keep checking to make sure that this looks straight and lined up, because I wouldn't want it to shift on me. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure it's still in the right place. And then insert the needle underneath a couple of the strands of yarn on the bunny face, but not all the way through to the back. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and pick up this strand of yarn here And I will just continue working around the same way. So now, if you wanted to have whiskers, then if you pull the strands out this way on each side of the face, then you can, when I did the cat's face, just like I did with the cat's face, I trimmed them and then I just frayed the yarn. I separated the 4 plies of yarn to make the whiskers. So you could do that for the bunny if you wanted to. I'm not going to make whiskers for the bunny. I'm not going to use these strands to make whiskers for the bunny. For the cat, I wanted whiskers, but for the bunny, I won't add the whiskers this time. So then I'll just go ahead and sew it behind there, but make sure I don't go to the back. And just pull it out to the other side, so that way it won't come unraveled. And then I'll cut that tail. And then I'll do the same thing with this one. I want to bring it all the way across. That way it won't come unraveled. So I'll just go ahead and insert the darning needle this way. Make sure that it's not going through the back of the stitches. And then I'll just come out this way. Okay, so that's the bottom part of the bunny's face now. I'm going to go ahead and weave in these tails before I continue with the eyes. I am going to weave these tails in before I continue, and I'll weave them in along the back. I will also weave in these tails as well. Now, if you want to use these to sew it onto your project, then you can do that as well. But I'll go ahead and weave these in since I will be turning this into a granny square. Okay, so now I need to sew on the eyes. So I want to stitch on some black yarn for the middle of the eye to make a little pupil. So what I'm going to do is I will take the eye, and you want to make sure that the right side is facing you. And I will take this yarn and I will stitch on some eyes in the center here. I'll just go near the top here, from the back to the front. And then a straight line here in the middle. And you can do that 2 times if you want, or just once. I just did a little straight line. I did that twice. So there is the inner part of the eye. I'll do the same thing for the second eye. Okay, so then I want to find the right side of my eye again. And then I'll insert the darning needle from the back of the work to the front. And then pull that all the way through to the front. And then line it up to make a straight line from the front all the way to the back. And then I'll do that one more time from the top. Oops, I have to rethread it here. And then, in the same line, go back to the bottom part. So I'm just going over it twice so it's visible. So then I have my 2 little eyes ready to sew on. So now here, I'll go ahead and just tie a couple of knots with the black yarn. 1 or 2 knots. And I did the same thing with the cat, except for I used green instead of using black yarn. So now what I want to do is I want to cut those strands of black yarn, but not right next to the knot, so they won't work themselves loose. So I want to make sure it's not right next to it. Just leave a little bit. Okay. Instead of using yarn, you could use some embroidery floss for this part of the eye if you wanted to as well. So now I need to make sure that I tuck that yarn, the black yarn, behind there so you don't see it when you sew the eye on. So you just want to line it up where you want it. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is thread the yarn on one of the strands of white yarn here, and then place the eye. So I'll go ahead and use the pink part of the yarn as my guide, and then have it a little bit to the left of the nose. So now, once I have the eye placed where I like it, I'll go ahead and take this and insert it into the white part of the eye and pull it all the way through to the back. And then what I want to do is the same thing like I did with the bottom part of the face here. What I want to do is pick up a strand of the yarn on the face of the bunny, knot all the way to the back. Now, if you're using it for an applique and you're not going to see the back when you sew it on, you wouldn't have to worry about just going through the top part of the stitch. You could just sew it all the way to the back if you're going to sew it onto something and you're not going to see the back of the work. But if you want to use it as the granny square, like I did here, you would want to make sure that it doesn't show to the back if you want to turn it into a granny square. But if you're not going to use it as a granny square and you're just going to sew it onto something where you won't see the back, you wouldn't have to worry about that. You could just sew it on without having to worry about if you can see the yarn tails in the back. Okay, so then after I go through the stitches on the face of the bunny, I'll come back through the white part of the eye to sew it on. And I'll just keep doing that all the way around until the eye is completely attached. And I'll make sure that I tuck in those strands of black yarn to hide them in the back there. Okay, and then pick up some of the stitches on the face of the bunny and then do the white yarn. And I'll just keep doing that all the way around until my eye is completely on. Okay, so then once you're satisfied that your eye is completely on, then you could just trim those strands of white yarn. And then I'll just repeat that for the second eye. So when I have that done, I'll meet you back here. So while I had the camera on pause, I went ahead and continued sewing on the second eye for my bunny face applique. I hope that you enjoyed the tutorial today. I want to thank you for watching and have a great day.